Friday, January 13th, 2012, 9:44 p.m. We're standing on the bridge of a massive luxury cruise ship. Out of nowhere, the helmsman speaks up to report a sudden, sharp course deviation. Less than 60 seconds later, the lives of 4,229 people will irrevocably change. The timeline of this disaster is incredibly precise. At exactly 9:45 p.m., the ship violently slams into a granite reef off the Italian island of Giglio. The sheer force tears a massive 53-meter gash right into the port side of the hull. But here's the kicker. It took until 10:58 p.m. for the order to abandon ship to actually be given. That's over an hour later. So what on earth happened during that agonizing gap?
Well, over the intercom, terrified passengers were fed a straight-up lie. The crew announced they were just experiencing a temporary electrical problem. The disconnect between that calm broadcast and the actual reality is chilling. Down below, this wasn't some simple power outage. The dark, freezing waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea were violently surging into the ship's engine room at a rate that would doom the entire vessel in under 4 hours.
Ultimately, the survival of the ship came down to one single number: 5. 5 watertight compartments flooded simultaneously. That is exactly 2 more than the ship's maximum survivable limit. Mathematically, it was a ghost ship the very second that rock hit. And yet, directly above all that rushing water, in the brightly lit dining rooms, waiters obliviously kept right on pouring wine and serving dessert like absolutely nothing was wrong. To really grasp the scale of this catastrophe, you have to understand the sheer size of the Costa Concordia. We're talking 290 meters long, 114,500 gross tons, 13 passenger decks. To put that into perspective, it's essentially a floating skyscraper holding over 4,000 souls. And as those engines completely died, this behemoth began an irreversible, terrifying tilt, listing heavily to its starboard side. You're probably wondering, why were they sailing so close to those rocks in the first place? It was all for this: the Inchino, or the salute. It's a maritime tradition where a ship intentionally veers off its programmed route to sail incredibly close to shore, exchanging waves and horn blasts with the locals. On this particular night, the plan was to pass a mere 300 meters from Giglio's rocky coastline. Now, history often paints Captain Francesco Schettino as a totally rogue actor, just doing whatever he wanted. But reality offers a pretty unexpected perspective shift. Yes, the Inchino was never officially authorized by maritime rules, but within the company culture of Costa Cruises, it was never officially prohibited either. It lived in this deeply entrenched gray area of institutional winking. Other captains did it all the time, the company knew, and they tacitly approved. To pull off this salute on January 13th, Schettino sailed closer than anyone had ever attempted before. He knowingly steered right into shallow water that his own charts warned was barely 30 meters deep. And then he took the most chilling step of all. He manually reached over and turned off the ship's navigation proximity alarms. That reckless override is exactly what allowed the submerged rocks of Scole to slice open the hull like a giant can opener. What followed was an absolute nightmare of conflicting information. The crew's initial response? Total paralysis. For 40 agonizing minutes, no general alarm ever sounded. Just put yourself in the shoes of an elderly passenger. Maybe you don't speak a word of Italian or English. Suddenly you're navigating pitch-black stairwells, tilted at a dizzying 20 degrees. You follow the emergency lights, only to find they lead to completely blocked exits. And over on the port side, half the lifeboats are just hanging uselessly over the rising hull instead of dropping into the water. Right in the middle of this horrifying chaos, at 11:46 p.m., a radio call cuts through the noise. It's Port Authority Captain Gregorio De Falco. He's been piecing together these fragmented reports and realizes something insane. Captain Schettino has actually abandoned his own sinking ship. He's sitting in a lifeboat claiming to be coordinating the rescue, while thousands are still trapped inside. De Falco snaps and screams at the evasive Schettino. "Vada a bordo, Cazzo! Get back on board, damn it!" But Schettino never went back. He made up excuses about it being too dark, the ship tilting too much, and he just stayed right there in that lifeboat. Ultimately, the human cost of that cowardice comes down to a devastating number: 32. 32 lives lost. Among them, a 5-year-old girl and an elderly couple who had celebrated their wedding anniversary that very evening.
They drowned or succumbed to hypothermia, trapped down in flooded lower compartments they simply couldn't escape.
The legal fallout after the disaster is a massive study in contrasts. After a 2-year trial that essentially branded Schettino a vain showman gambling with thousands of lives, he got 16 years in prison. But Costa Cruises, the corporation that actively fostered this whole culture, they paid a €1 million fine and settled out of court for undisclosed sums. And zero, literally zero, corporate executives ever faced a single criminal charge.
Meanwhile, for 2.5 years, the ship just sat there, half submerged off the coast of Giglio like the rotting carcass of a beached whale. Removing it required something entirely unprecedented called the Parbuckling Project. It became the largest maritime salvage operation in human history. It was an absolutely insane engineering feat that took 19 hours of continuous, agonizing rotation just to pull the massive, flooded carcass upright so it could be towed off to Genoa and scrapped.
The sheer asymmetry of this whole disaster is staggering when you really think about it. It takes just one man's vain decision and 4 short hours for a massive flagship to sink. But the salvage and cleanup, that required 5 years, 500 workers, and over $2 billion just to erase the physical evidence of that night. $2 billion just to clean up a mess caused by someone trying to show off.
Maritime law is ancient, and it's completely unambiguous. The master is the last to leave. Schettino's violation of that code was so total, so public, and so extensively recorded that he literally birthed a new verb in the Italian tabloids, fare un Schettino, to abandon your responsibilities in spectacular fashion. But perhaps the most haunting detail of all happened years later. When salvage crews finally cut their way deep into the dark, waterlogged wreckage of the ship, they found the captain's table. Sitting right there, perfectly preserved in the ruin, was a half-eaten plate of lobster.